Ladies and gentlemen, there is a part of you, a part you never speak of, a part that hides in the dim corridors of your mind, quietly pulling the strings of your life. It's the reason you say yes when you mean no. It's the reason you quit when you're close to winning. It's the reason you feel unworthy of the very things you've prayed for. This isn't weakness. This isn't bad luck. This is self-sabotage, the invisible hand of your repressed shadow guiding you away from your own light. And here's the cruel truth: until you face it, until you understand why a part of you fears your own success, you will keep reliving the same patterns, no matter how hard you try to change. Today, we're going into the depths, not to destroy the shadow, but to understand it, embrace it, and finally, be free from its grip. Because the life you've been chasing isn't waiting somewhere out there. It's locked behind the very walls you've built inside yourself. Stay until the end, because what you hear today won't just change your thinking. It will reveal the truth about the part of you that has been quietly running your life and how to take your power back. Self-sabotage is not always the enemy we think it is. Most people approach it with anger, frustration, or shame, believing that their inability to follow through on their goals means they are weak, lazy, or somehow broken. But the truth is far more subtle and, in many ways, far more human. Self-sabotage is rarely a conscious choice. It is an unconscious defense mechanism, a shield the mind builds to protect you from what it believes is danger. The irony is that what it perceives as danger is often the very thing you desire most: success, love, happiness, or freedom. It begins quietly, almost invisibly in your early years. Every moment of your life has shaped you, especially the ones that hurt. If you grew up in an environment where being yourself led to rejection, punishment, or ridicule, your mind learned to associate authenticity with pain. If your efforts were dismissed, your successes ignored, or your dreams mocked, your mind learned that it's safer not to try too hard. These lessons sink deep, and they don't vanish simply because you've grown older. They live in the background, whispering, "Don't get too close to what you want. It might hurt again." This is why people sometimes find themselves procrastinating on projects that could change their lives, ending relationships that are healthy, or downplaying opportunities they've worked years to get. It's not because they don't want the good thing, it's because part of them believes having it will bring pain. Your conscious mind says, "This is what I want," but your subconscious mind, shaped by years of experience, says, "This is not safe." The result is an internal conflict where you become both the pursuer and the saboteur of your own dreams. When you start to see self-sabotage through this lens, something shifts. Instead of seeing it as proof that you are flawed, you begin to recognize it as proof that your mind is trying, in its own misguided way, to protect you. It's like a loyal but misinformed guard at the gate, keeping out not just threats, but also opportunities, friendships, and experiences that could help you grow. This understanding doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does change the way you approach it. You stop trying to battle yourself into change and start trying to listen to what your deeper self is afraid of. Consider how often self-sabotage wears a mask so convincing you don't even realize it's there. It might appear as perfectionism, where you never launch your idea because it's not ready yet. It might look like overcommitting, scattering your focus so you can say, "I didn't have time," rather than face the possibility of failing at something you truly care about. It can even appear as chronic distraction, where you bury yourself in work, entertainment, or other people's problems so you don't have to sit with your own. These are not random habits. They are patterns rooted in a deeper narrative, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve. The key to breaking this cycle begins with awareness. You cannot change what you refuse to see. The moment you catch yourself pulling away from something you want, pause and ask, what am I protecting myself from right now? It might be the fear of embarrassment, the fear of being judged, or the fear that if you get what you want, you won't be able to keep it. The question isn't meant to shame you, but to bring the hidden motives into the light. Because self-sabotage thrives in the shadows of your awareness, and the moment you shine a light on it, its power begins to weaken. Another important truth is that self-sabotage is not about destroying your future. It's about preserving your identity. Your mind clings to what feels familiar because familiarity equals safety. If your identity has been built around struggle, scarcity, or feeling undeserving, then success, abundance, and love feel unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. This is why sudden positive changes in life can make some people anxious or even depressed. The shift challenges their internal blueprint of who they believe they are. The journey to overcoming self-sabotage is less about forcing yourself to behave differently and more about gently rewriting your internal blueprint. It's about showing your mind over time that what you want is not a threat. This might mean taking small, deliberate steps toward your goals instead of trying to leap toward them all at once. It might mean practicing self-compassion when you stumble, reminding yourself that mistakes are not proof of inadequacy, but proof that you are learning. Understanding self-sabotage is the first step in disarming it. It's not an enemy lurking in your mind. It's a part of you that has been misled by old fears. By listening to it, learning from it, and guiding it with patience, you can transform it from a force that holds you back into a signal that points toward where you need healing most. When you recognize that your greatest resistance often stands guard over your greatest potential, you stop running from it and start walking toward it with courage. And in doing so, you give yourself the chance to live a life that isn't just free of sabotage, but also full of possibility. The shadow within is not some mystical monster lurking in the darkness. It is far more personal, far more intimate. It is made up of all the parts of yourself you have decided consciously or unconsciously must remain hidden. These are the emotions, desires, and impulses you learned were wrong to express, the traits you were told were unacceptable, the moments of vulnerability that were met with ridicule instead of understanding. Over time, these aspects of you were not erased. They were simply pushed out of sight, buried deep in the unconscious where you hoped they could no longer cause trouble. But nothing you bury within yourself truly disappears. It waits, it watches, and, in subtle ways, it begins to shape your life from the shadows. The shadow is born the moment we split ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts. As children, we are raw, unfiltered, and instinctive. We cry when we are hurt. We demand when we are hungry. We express joy without restraint, and we speak truth without calculating the cost. Then comes the conditioning. Don't cry, it's weak. Don't be angry, it's rude. Don't show off, it's arrogant. Don't dream so big, you'll be disappointed. Some of these messages are meant to guide us, but many of them teach us to disown pieces of ourselves. And when you disown a part of yourself, it doesn't vanish. It becomes part of your shadow. The problem is, the shadow doesn't sit quietly in a locked room. It moves through you in disguised ways. Repressed anger might surface as passive aggression or chronic resentment. Denied ambition might turn into self-sabotage or a tendency to downplay your capabilities. Suppressed desires might manifest as addictions, unhealthy relationships, or an endless cycle of chasing external validation. You may think you are making decisions from your conscious, rational mind, but often you are simply acting out the script your shadow has been writing for years. One of the most dangerous things about the shadow is that you can't see it directly. Just as your eyes cannot see themselves without a mirror, you cannot see your shadow without something to reflect it back to you. This reflection often comes through other people. The traits you dislike most in others, the ones that trigger you, frustrate you, or provoke an intense reaction, are often the very traits you have rejected in yourself. This is why self-awareness is so difficult. The mind is brilliant at pointing outward and saying, "That's the problem," when in truth, the reflection is showing you an unacknowledged part of your own nature. It's important to understand that the shadow is not evil. It's simply unloved. Every piece of you that you've pushed into the dark was once a natural, innocent expression of who you are. It became distorted because it was banished rather than understood. Think of it like a plant kept in a closet. It twists and warps in the absence of light. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It just needs space to grow in a healthier way. The same is true of the shadow. When you bring awareness and acceptance to it, it stops needing to control you from behind the scenes. The shadow becomes destructive only when it is ignored. When you refuse to acknowledge it, it finds its way into your life through unconscious behavior, sabotaging your work, ruining relationships, making you distrust yourself. You may feel like life is throwing obstacles in your path, when in reality, it's the shadow manifesting those obstacles to keep you within the limits of what feels safe. If you've ever felt like you are caught in the same painful loop, no matter how much you try to change, there is a good chance your shadow is behind it. Facing the shadow requires a kind of courage that many people avoid because it is uncomfortable. It asks you to sit with your own contradictions, to admit that you are not always who you pretend to be. It demands that you confront feelings you've denied, to see not only your light, but also your darkness without flinching. And perhaps the hardest part, it asks you to treat these disowned parts with compassion rather than judgment. This is where many people struggle, because they believe that acknowledging their shadow means excusing bad behavior or giving in to destructive impulses. But the truth is the opposite. Integrating the shadow is the very thing that dissolves its destructive power. When you integrate the shadow, you are not becoming less good, you are becoming whole. Wholeness is not about polishing away your flaws, it's about understanding the roots of your behavior, so you can act from a place of choice rather than compulsion. When you know your shadow, you can catch yourself in the moment of self-sabotage and ask, what am I really trying to protect myself from? You can recognize when a strong reaction to someone else is actually a signal to look inward, and you can reclaim the energy that was once trapped in suppression, using it instead to live with more authenticity and purpose. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It holds the lessons you most need to learn about yourself, the truths you have avoided, and the strengths you didn't know you had. Every time you turn toward it, instead of away from it, you reclaim another piece of your power, and the more pieces you reclaim, the more your life begins to feel like it truly belongs to you. For it is not by running from the shadow that we find freedom, it is by walking straight into it, lantern in hand, and seeing what has been waiting there for us all along. The shadow rarely announces itself with drama. It doesn't come crashing through the door, demanding your attention. Instead, it works quietly, patiently, like a whisper in the back of your mind that you mistake for your own thoughts. It's the silent war within you, a war where there is no obvious enemy, because the one holding you back is also the one who wants you to succeed. This is what makes it so disorienting. You are both the commander leading the charge toward your dreams and the saboteur placing traps along the way. This war often begins in the smallest moments, moments so ordinary you wouldn't think to examine them. You might be on the verge of sending an application for a job you've always wanted, and suddenly you hear the voice. You're not qualified enough. You'll embarrass yourself. It's better not to try than to fail. Or perhaps you've met someone who makes you feel deeply seen, but instead of opening up, you pull back, cancel plans, or convince yourself they'll lose interest. These aren't random thoughts. They are tactics of the shadow, designed to keep you in familiar territory. Because to the shadow, familiarity equals safety, even if that safety means staying in dissatisfaction. The most dangerous part of this silent war is that it disguises itself as reason, logic, even wisdom. You tell yourself you're just being practical or waiting for the right time. You convince yourself that walking away from an opportunity is the smart choice. when deep down you know it's fear wearing a clever mask. And because the shadow operates beneath your conscious awareness, you can spend years, even decades, believing these false justifications, never realizing they are carefully crafted excuses meant to protect you from stepping outside your comfort zone. What makes this battle so exhausting is that you can't see the front lines. There's no obvious confrontation, no clear beginning or end. The war is fought in subtle choices. The phone call you don't return, the project you don't start, the conversation you avoid, the way you keep busy with things that don't matter so you don't have to face the things that do. It's a war of attrition, slowly draining your energy and confidence until you start to believe the lie that change is impossible for you. This silent war is fueled by old wounds, moments where you learned, consciously or not, that taking risks leads to pain. Maybe you spoke up as a child and were laughed at, so now your shadow steps in to keep you quiet. Maybe you once gave everything to a dream and watched it crumble, so now your shadow convinces you not to try again. These protective instincts were born in real moments of hurt, but they have overstayed their welcome. They were meant to shield you from harm in specific situations, not to dictate the entire course of your life. The shadow doesn't know when to stop. It only knows to defend, to avoid, to keep you from feeling that same pain again. That is why the battle feels endless. You are not fighting a malicious enemy. You are negotiating with a part of yourself that believes it is saving your life. The tragedy is that in its efforts to protect you, the shadow often prevents you from living at all. Breaking free from this silent war requires learning to hear the difference between fear that warns you of real danger and fear that is simply the shadow trying to keep you safe from growth. This isn't easy because the shadow's voice can be persuasive, even comforting. It will tell you you're not ready or you're better off where you are, and part of you will believe it because it feels true. But the test is to pause and ask yourself, is this fear protecting me or is it protecting my limitations? That question can reveal more than you expect. There is also another layer to this war, the guilt and frustration that come from knowing you are the one holding yourself back. You feel the weight of wasted time, the sting of missed opportunities, the ache of knowing you're capable of more, but still playing small. This is where the shadow gains even more power. It feeds on your self-criticism. The more you blame yourself, the more you reinforce the very beliefs the shadow has been planting, that you're not enough, that you'll never change, that it's safer not to try. The turning point comes when you realize this war cannot be won through brute force. You can't simply push harder or be more disciplined if the part of you doing the sabotaging is still operating in the dark. You have to meet your shadow with awareness to see it not as an enemy to destroy, but as a wounded part of yourself that needs to be understood. The moment you shine light on the shadow's tactics, they begin to lose their hold. You start to notice the patterns in real time, the excuses, the delays, the diversions, and in noticing them, you create the space to choose differently. This war ends not when you overpower the shadow, but when you integrate it. When you acknowledge, yes, part of me is afraid of failing, of being seen, of changing, and that's okay. But I can move forward anyway. That is when the shadow transforms from a hidden saboteur into a quiet ally, one that no longer needs to work against you because it no longer fears what you're becoming. The silent war within you may have shaped your past, but it does not have to dictate your future. Every moment you choose awareness over autopilot, every time you act, despite the whisper of doubt, you reclaim ground from the shadow, and over time, the war quiets, not because you've defeated yourself, but because you've finally made peace with every part of who you are. Self-sabotage is not random. It is not a streak of bad luck or a mysterious curse hanging over your life. It operates through triggers and patterns, a complex system of cues, emotions, and behaviors that repeat themselves over and over until you learn to notice them. The frustrating part is that these patterns often hide in plain sight. They blend into your daily routine so seamlessly that you don't even realize you are reliving the same story you've been telling yourself for years. A trigger is anything that activates an old wound or belief. It could be a comment from someone that feels like criticism, even if it was meant to help. It could be an opportunity that feels too big, reminding you of a past failure. It could be the subtle feeling of being ignored, which takes you right back to moments in childhood where you felt invisible. The trigger itself is not the problem, it is the reaction that follows. Triggers activate the shadow, and once the shadow is in control, your choices are no longer fully conscious. You act from instinct, from survival, from old programming that was designed to protect you, but now keeps you stuck. Patterns form when the same triggers lead to the same responses again and again. For example, you might have a pattern of procrastinating on important tasks because you fear judgment if your work isn't perfect, or you might repeatedly push away people who care about you because closeness makes you feel vulnerable and unsafe. You might even sabotage financial opportunities because deep down you believe you're not worthy of abundance. The pattern itself becomes so familiar that it starts to feel like part of your identity. That's just how I am. But it isn't who you are. It's simply who you've been conditioned to be. The reason these patterns are so hard to break is because they are reinforced by belief. Every time you avoid a challenge, the shadow takes it as proof that you couldn't have handled it anyway. Every time you hold back your voice, it reinforces the belief that speaking up is dangerous. Over time, the trigger response cycle becomes a closed loop, one that constantly feeds itself. The worst part is that this loop often disguises itself as rational thinking. You tell yourself you're not ready yet or waiting for the right moment, but those are just well-polished versions of the same fear that has always stopped you. To begin breaking these patterns, the first step is awareness. You must learn to catch yourself in the moment. Notice not just what you are doing, but why you are doing it. This requires slowing down enough to observe your own mind. When you feel the urge to avoid, delay, or self-destruct, pause and ask, what just happened? What am I reacting to right now? You may be surprised by how quickly the mind tries to deflect the question or offer surface-level answers. This is because the shadow does not want you to dig deeper. It thrives on unconscious repetition. Once you identify the trigger, the next step is to trace it back to its origin. Often, the emotion you feel in the present moment is much larger than the situation calls for because it is connected to something in your past. The criticism from your boss is not just about the comment they made, it's about the memory of being scolded by a parent or teacher. The hesitation to take a big opportunity is not about the opportunity itself. It's about the fear of repeating a failure from years ago. When you connect the dots between past and present, you start to see that your reactions are not inevitable. They are conditioned responses, and conditioned responses can be changed. Breaking the cycle means replacing automatic reactions with conscious choices. This doesn't happen overnight. It begins with small acts of resistance against your old patterns. If your pattern is to withdraw when someone gets too close, try staying in the conversation for a few minutes longer than usual. If your pattern is to delay starting a project, commit to working on it for just 5 minutes without judging the result. Each time you interrupt the loop, you send a signal to your shadow that it doesn't need to protect you in the same way anymore. It's also essential to approach this work with compassion. Patterns exist because they once served a purpose. They were strategies your younger self developed to feel safe, accepted, or in control. Blaming yourself for having them only reinforces the shame that keeps them alive. Instead, treat them as outdated tools. Thank them for how they once helped you, and then gently put them down in favor of something better. The truth is, your triggers and patterns are not here to punish you. They are here to show you exactly where your healing needs to happen. Every time you feel that familiar pull towards self-sabotage, it is an invitation to pause and ask, what am I protecting myself from? The answer will almost always point you toward a fear, belief, or memory that is still shaping your choices. And if you can bring that into the light, if you can see it clearly without judgment, you take the first step toward freedom. As you do this work, the patterns lose their grip. The triggers still appear, but they no longer control you. You begin to respond instead of react. You start making choices that align with who you want to be, not who your past has taught you to be. And in those moments, you reclaim your life from the quiet, relentless influence of the shadow. That is the power of understanding your triggers and patterns. Once you can see them, they can no longer run your life without your consent. Facing the shadow requires a level of honesty that most people avoid. Radical self-honesty is not about blaming yourself or admitting to faults with a sense of shame. It is about seeing yourself clearly. Every thought, every impulse, every fear, without disguise or pretense. This means confronting the parts of yourself you have hidden, the impulses you've denied, the choices you've made that you would rather forget. It requires a willingness to stop running from the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the obstacle to your own happiness is not outside of you, but within. Many people are experts at self-deception. They tell themselves stories that justify their behavior, protect their self-image, or keep them comfortable in the familiar. They rationalize failure with excuses, blame circumstances for missed opportunities, and decorate avoidance with noble intentions. But self-deception is the soil in which the shadow grows. Every lie you tell yourself, even the small ones, strengthens the parts of you that act against your own interests. Radical self-honesty, by contrast, begins the process of clearing that soil so that authentic growth can take root. To practice radical self-honesty, you must first observe yourself without judgment. This is not easy, because most people are conditioned to respond to perceived flaws with defensiveness or shame. When you catch yourself procrastinating, self-criticizing, or withdrawing instead of turning away or blaming the circumstances, ask, what am I really feeling? What am I afraid of? This is the act of naming, of bringing unconscious impulses into consciousness. By naming them, you strip them of the hidden power they have when they operate in the dark. Self-honesty also involves acknowledging contradictions within yourself. You may find that you want something deeply, success, love, freedom, yet your actions betray resistance or fear. You may see a part of you that desires change, and another part that clings desperately to the familiar. Recognizing this duality is not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is a sign of maturity and awareness. The shadow thrives in denial, but once you admit the contradictions, you begin to dismantle its influence. You can no longer be unknowingly pushed in directions that do not serve you. Another key aspect of radical self-honesty is facing uncomfortable emotions. Fear, anger, jealousy, and shame are often at the root of self-sabotage, yet society teaches us to hide them, suppress them, or disguise them as something socially acceptable. The problem is that unacknowledged emotions do not disappear. They fester, creating patterns of avoidance and self-doubt. By acknowledging these feelings honestly, not judging them, not excusing them, simply recognizing them, you reclaim the energy that has been trapped in resistance. You allow yourself to feel fully without being ruled by those feelings. It is also important to recognize the narratives you tell yourself. From early life experiences, you may have internalized stories such as, I am not enough, I will never succeed, or I do not deserve happiness. These narratives shape the lens through which you see the world and influence every decision you make. Radical self-honesty requires identifying these stories, examining their origin, and questioning their validity. Just because you have believed something for decades does not mean it is true. The act of questioning these beliefs is liberating. It weakens the shadow's hold and allows you to see new possibilities. Self-honesty is not a one-time event. It is a continuous practice. It is the daily willingness to pause, observe, and ask yourself, am I acting from fear or from choice? Am I honoring my true intentions, or am I responding to an old pattern? Each moment of awareness chips away at the automatic behaviors that serve the shadow. Each honest acknowledgement of fear, resistance, or self-doubt illuminates the path toward conscious living. One of the most profound effects of radical self-honesty is the way it transforms your relationship with yourself. When you stop hiding, avoiding, or lying to yourself, you cultivate a sense of integrity that extends beyond mere behavior. You begin to trust your own judgment, your own instincts, and your own desires. The shadow loses its manipulative power because you are no longer blind to its presence. Instead of being a hidden puppet master, it becomes a visible part of your internal landscape, something you can observe, understand, and integrate. The journey of radical self-honesty is not comfortable, and it is not quick. It requires courage, patience, and persistence. But the reward is profound. Freedom from the hidden chains of self-sabotage, clarity about who you are and what you want, and the ability to act in alignment with your deepest values. When you face yourself honestly, the shadow no longer controls your life. You do. And in that clarity, you find the power to transform your fears, your doubts, and your hidden impulses into allies on the path to your fullest potential. By embracing radical self-honesty, you not only begin to dismantle the shadow's influence, but also awaken to the possibility of living a life guided by truth, awareness, and conscious choice. It is the bridge between being unconsciously driven and fully empowered, and it marks the moment when self-sabotage can finally lose its grip over your destiny. Integration over suppression is the key that transforms self-sabotage from a destructive force into a source of understanding and strength. For too long, many people have been taught to fight the parts of themselves they consider unacceptable. They are told to suppress anger, hide fear, silence desire, or ignore impulses that feel inconvenient or inappropriate. But suppression does not eliminate these parts. It only drives them deeper into the unconscious, where they gain power and influence in subtle, often insidious ways. The shadow, when denied, becomes like water under a dam. It will eventually find cracks, seep through, or burst forth when you least expect it. True transformation comes not from pushing these elements away, but from bringing them into conscious awareness and learning to work with them. Integration means acknowledging every part of yourself, even the parts you fear or despise, and understanding how they serve you. It is about seeing that the shadow's resistance, hesitation, and self-sabotaging impulses have a function, however misguided, and that by recognizing them, you can reclaim the energy they once used to control you. The moment you stop battling yourself, you stop feeding the conflict and begin to redirect it toward conscious growth. Consider anger, for example. Most people are taught that anger is bad, destructive, or unworthy of expression. As a result, they push it down, ignore it, or deny it. Yet, the very act of suppression creates internal tension, anxiety, and resentment. When anger is integrated, it can become a compass, showing you where your boundaries have been crossed or where your needs are unmet. Instead of allowing it to erupt uncontrollably or fester silently, integration teaches you to recognize its presence, understand its origin, and respond in ways that are constructive and empowering. The same principle applies to fear, jealousy, or insecurity. Each of these emotions carries information, signals from the unconscious about what matters to you, what you value, and where you feel threatened. Integration also requires dialogue with the self. You must be willing to look inward and ask, why does this part of me resist? What is it protecting? How can I honor its concerns without letting it dominate my life? This internal conversation is not easy because the shadow often reacts defensively. It may attempt to convince you that you are making a mistake, that you are not ready, or that your desires are dangerous. But the act of noticing these defenses, listening without judgment, and choosing consciously anyway begins to break the cycle of automatic self-sabotage. You shift from being led by unseen impulses to being guided by awareness. Another essential aspect of integration is accepting imperfection. Many people suppress parts of themselves because they feel flawed, ashamed, or unworthy. Integration requires you to see that flaws, weaknesses, and contradictions are not enemies to be eradicated, but aspects of human experience to be understood. When you embrace your imperfections, you neutralize the shame that the shadow uses to maintain control. You begin to act from wholeness rather than scarcity, from authenticity rather than fear. The process of integration is gradual. It cannot be forced or rushed, and it requires patience and consistent attention. Small steps matter. Noticing a recurring pattern, acknowledging a hidden emotion, choosing to act differently than your habitual response. Each act of conscious attention is a moment of integration. Over time, these moments accumulate, and the shadow's influence diminishes because it no longer operates in the dark. Its energy, once used to resist or sabotage, is reclaimed and redirected toward constructive action. Integration also involves forgiveness, not only of yourself, but of the shadow itself. The shadow acts with the intention of keeping you safe, even when its methods are misguided. By forgiving both your past mistakes and the parts of yourself that resisted growth, you release the tension that has been binding your energy. You create a space where self-awareness and self-compassion coexist, and where you can respond to life rather than react out of fear or conditioning. When integration is fully realized, you experience a profound shift in your relationship with yourself. You no longer feel like an internal battlefield torn between desires and fears. Instead, you become a coherent whole, capable of observing your impulses without being driven by them. The energy that once fueled self-sabotage now fuels purpose, creativity, and intentional action. You begin to see that every part of yourself, even the parts that once felt destructive, contributes to your growth when acknowledged and embraced. Integration over suppression is the path to freedom. It is the act of transforming the unseen, unconscious forces that have guided your life into conscious allies. By accepting, understanding, and working with your shadow, you reclaim power that has always been yours but was hidden behind fear, resistance, and denial. The shadow ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a teacher, showing you not only the patterns that once held you back, but also the strength, resilience, and wisdom that reside within you. In learning to integrate rather than suppress, you step into a life that is whole, authentic, and alive. You stop running from yourself and begin living in alignment with all that you are. And in that alignment, the energy of the shadow is transformed from a hidden saboteur into a guiding force, pointing you toward the deepest expression of your true potential. Reprogramming the mind is one of the most profound steps in overcoming self-sabotage. The patterns, fears, and beliefs that have guided your behavior for years are not immutable. They are the product of conditioning, repetition, and unconscious acceptance. Yet, because they operate beneath the surface of awareness, they often feel like an unchangeable reality. Every time you self-sabotage, your mind is simply following a script written long before you understood who you truly are or what you are capable of. To reclaim your life, you must consciously rewrite that script, replacing the limiting beliefs with empowering ones that align with your deepest intentions. The first step in reprogramming the mind is awareness. You cannot change what you do not recognize. Every thought, every automatic reaction, and every pattern of avoidance is a clue. Begin observing the moments when fear, doubt, or self-sabotage surfaces. Notice the circumstances, the triggers, and the internal dialogue that arises. By cataloging these experiences, you illuminate the unconscious pathways your mind has been traveling for years. Awareness is the light that allows you to see the mechanisms of your own behavior without judgment. Once you recognize these patterns, the next step is questioning them. Ask yourself, is this thought or belief really true? Does it serve me or is it keeping me small? The mind often confuses familiarity with truth. Just because you have believed you are not good enough for decades does not make it a fact. By challenging these beliefs and examining their origin, you begin to dissolve the unquestioned authority they have held over your life. Questioning is not mere skepticism. It is a deliberate act of discernment, separating truth from old programming. After questioning comes conscious replacement. Every time you catch yourself thinking a self-limiting thought, consciously introduce a counter-thought that reflects your true capability and value. For example, replace "I am bound to fail" with "I am learning, growing, and capable of success." Replace "I don't deserve this opportunity" with "I am worthy of growth, abundance, and fulfillment." This practice may feel awkward at first because the mind is accustomed to its old patterns, but repetition is the key. Just as a path in a forest becomes clearer the more it is walked, so too does your new mental pathway strengthen each time you consciously choose a supportive belief. Visualization is another powerful tool for reprogramming the mind. Imagine yourself acting without self-sabotage, achieving your goals, and responding to challenges with calm confidence. Visualize the energy, the emotions, and the sensations of success. The brain cannot always distinguish between real experience and vividly imagined experience. By repeatedly rehearsing empowered behavior in your mind, you begin to train your nervous system to respond differently in real-life situations. Visualization bridges the gap between intention and action, helping to replace fear-driven reactions with intentional choices. Affirmation and consistent internal dialogue also play a crucial role. The language you use to speak to yourself is either a builder or a destroyer. Every time you silently criticize, doubt, or condemn yourself, you reinforce the shadow's control. Conversely, consistent affirmations, when paired with genuine belief and repetition, act as mental scaffolding for new thought patterns. They remind you of your worth, your ability, and your right to pursue your highest aspirations. Over time, these repeated messages reshape the internal narrative, weakening the shadow's influence. Integration of new habits and actions solidifies the reprogramming process. Thoughts alone are insufficient. They must be paired with behavior. When you consciously act in alignment with your new beliefs, you reinforce them at a deeper embodied level. Each small victory, completing a project despite fear, speaking your truth, pursuing an opportunity despite doubt, signals to your mind that the old patterns are no longer necessary. Action cements awareness, belief, and intention into lived reality, creating a feedback loop that strengthens your conscious programming. Another critical aspect of reprogramming is self-compassion. Old patterns do not disappear overnight, and the mind may resist change. When you stumble or revert to self-sabotaging behavior, do not respond with judgment or self-punishment. Treat these moments as opportunities for observation and learning. Understand that the shadow operates with the intention of protection, even when misguided. Compassion allows you to respond with patience and persistence rather than frustration and defeat, which only reinforce the very patterns you are seeking to change. Finally, reprogramming the mind is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Life will continue to present challenges, triggers, and opportunities to fall back into old patterns. Each encounter is a chance to reinforce the new beliefs, to act consciously, and to deepen your mastery over your internal landscape. The mind, once trained, will no longer unconsciously pull you away from your potential. Instead, it becomes an ally, guiding you toward the fulfillment, growth, and freedom you have consciously chosen. By reprogramming the mind, you transform self-sabotage from an invisible, uncontrollable force into a conscious signal, a guidepost showing you where old beliefs still need attention. You replace fear with awareness, doubt with confidence, and limitation with possibility. The shadow, once a master of your actions, becomes a companion you understand and integrate. In this way, reprogramming the mind is not just a tool for overcoming self-sabotage. It is the foundation for living intentionally, authentically, and powerfully. Overcoming self-sabotage ultimately requires the cultivation of consistent conscious action. Awareness, honesty, integration, and reprogramming are all essential steps. But without deliberate action, they remain theoretical exercises. The shadow cannot influence you if you are actively choosing to move forward, step by step, in alignment with your intentions. Action is the bridge between understanding and transformation. It is through repeated intentional effort that the patterns of self-sabotage begin to dissolve, and your life begins to reflect the truth of your potential. The challenge with action is that it often feels risky. The mind resists stepping into the unknown because the shadow thrives on safety, predictability, and familiarity. Taking action toward your goals, whether it is pursuing a career opportunity, speaking your truth, or confronting an internal fear, triggers the same protective mechanisms that have kept you small. Procrastination, distraction, doubt, and avoidance all arise as forms of self-sabotage, seeking to keep you within the confines of the comfortable and familiar. Yet action does not require perfection. It requires only willingness. Each small, imperfect step builds momentum, signaling to the shadow that growth and safety are not mutually exclusive. Consistent conscious action begins with intention. You must clearly define what you want, why you want it, and what it would mean to achieve it. The mind responds to clarity. Vague desires are easily drowned by fear and hesitation. Once intention is set, action follows naturally, but it must be deliberate. This is not random busyness or mindless effort. It is purposeful movement aligned with your goals. Each choice, each small task completed, becomes a vote for the version of yourself you wish to embody. Over time, these votes accumulate, creating a trajectory that propels you forward despite the shadow's resistance. Accountability is also essential in sustaining action. The mind has a tendency to rationalize inaction, to postpone efforts with plausible excuses. By creating structures of accountability, whether through journaling, sharing your goals with a trusted friend, or setting measurable milestones, you externalize a portion of the discipline needed to stay on course. Accountability does not diminish autonomy. Rather, it supports it by reminding you of your commitment to yourself, reinforcing the connection between intention and follow-through. Equally important is the practice of reflection. Action without reflection can reinforce old patterns rather than dismantle them. After taking steps toward your goals, pause to observe the results, your emotional response, and any patterns that emerge. Did fear arise, and if so, how did you respond? Did self-doubt attempt to derail you, and were you able to notice it before acting? Reflection transforms action into learning, allowing each step to teach you more about the shadow, about your triggers, and about your capacity to respond differently in the future. Persistence is the cornerstone of conscious action. Change is rarely linear, setbacks are inevitable, and old patterns often resurface when you least expect them. The key is not to be defeated by failure, but to treat each lapse as data, as information that helps you refine your approach. The shadow thrives on the illusion of permanence. It wants you to believe that every setback proves your limitations. Persistence shatters that illusion. Every time you continue after a stumble, every time you act despite fear, you weaken the shadow's authority over your life and reinforce your own agency. Another vital aspect of conscious action is embracing discomfort. Growth and transformation almost always involve leaving familiar territory. The shadow resists this because comfort is safety. But discomfort is a signal that you're expanding beyond old limits, stepping into potential you have long denied yourself. By learning to tolerate and even embrace discomfort, you diminish the power of fear, teaching the mind that new experiences, challenges, and opportunities are not threats, but avenues for growth. Action also involves aligning your daily habits with your highest intentions. Self-sabotage often thrives in inconsistency. The mind is easily overwhelmed by disorganization, indecision, or scattered focus. By creating routines and rituals that support your goals, you reduce the opportunity for the shadow to assert control. Habits are the scaffolding upon which intentional living is built. Even small, repeated actions, a 5-minute meditation, a focused work session, a reflective journaling practice, accumulate over time, reinforcing conscious momentum and weakening the patterns of self-sabotage. Conscious action is amplified when combined with self-compassion. Progress is rarely perfect, and the mind may resist through doubt, frustration, or self-criticism. Approaching your efforts with patience and understanding keeps the shadow from regaining influence. Each action, whether successful or flawed, is a step toward mastery. By honoring effort over perfection and valuing consistency over instant results, you create an environment in which conscious action can thrive and self-sabotage loses its foothold. The practice of consistent conscious action transforms understanding into power. Awareness, honesty, integration, and reprogramming set the stage, but it is action that enacts real change. Step by step, decision by decision, choice by choice, you reclaim your agency. The shadow may still whisper, but its voice grows weaker with each deliberate move toward your authentic self. Through consistent action, you embody the life you desire, proving to yourself that your potential is not limited by old fears, but liberated by your willingness to act. As we draw this journey to a close, it becomes clear that self-sabotage is not some external curse, but a hidden part of ourselves, the shadow that has been silently shaping our lives. It thrives in denial, fear, and unawareness, subtly steering our choices and keeping us small. Yet, the shadow is not our enemy. It is a reflection of what we have disowned, a teacher pointing toward growth, understanding, and integration. By observing it without judgment, practicing radical self-honesty, understanding our triggers, reprogramming our mind, and taking consistent conscious action, we reclaim the power that was always ours. The path to overcoming self-sabotage is not about erasing the shadow or suppressing it. It is about integration. Every fear, hesitation, and impulse contains information about what we value, what we need to heal, and how we can act more authentically. When we face these parts of ourselves with awareness and compassion, the destructive patterns lose their grip. The energy once used in avoidance, doubt, or resistance is transformed into conscious choice, empowering us to act in alignment with our highest intentions. Through this process, we shift from living unconsciously, bound by fear and old programming, to living intentionally, guided by clarity, courage, and self-trust. The mind, once a silent saboteur, becomes a conscious ally. The shadow, once hidden and controlling, becomes visible and integrated. In this alignment, we find freedom. Freedom to act, to create, to grow, and to express the fullness of who we truly are. Overcoming self-sabotage is a journey of wholeness. It requires patience, persistence, and compassion, but it is deeply rewarding. Every step toward awareness, every act of honesty, every choice to act consciously brings us closer to a life lived fully, authentically, and powerfully. The shadow no longer dictates our path. Instead, it guides us toward mastery, teaching us that the power to transform our lives has always resided within ourselves. This is not merely survival or avoidance. This is the art of conscious living, the reclamation of our potential, and the realization that the person we were meant to be is waiting, whole and complete, on the other side of fear.